I found the talk by Professor Barnum just now very inspiring. So you see that technically you can do it. And I'm a campaigner, I'm not a scientist. I found it very interesting to listen to all the brilliant scientific input we had all this morning. And I think now it's up to us to change politics and to just do it. We can do it. I think Austria can do it. We're not quite there yet, but I think I'm going to tell you a bit about the Austrian situation. The title of the session says, can renewables step up to the mark? I think Professor Barnum has demonstrated they can in Britain as well as in Austria. Also, what can you learn from the Austrian and from the German experience? And I think that's slightly more tricky because every single country has got individual challenges. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the challenges we've been up to and are still up to. We had Bundeskanzler Faymann, that's the Prime Minister, in Paris for COP21 at the Leaders event. He said in his statement, Austria has always been opposed to the use of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is not the way to tackle climate change. It is not sustainable, neither in ecological nor in economic terms. Just think of the enormous costs of the unresolved storage of nuclear waste. As I'm going to show, some bits of that remark are not quite true, but we welcomed his statement as we had asked a member of his cabinet for him to speak up against nuclear at this event, and he did. So it was good. To understand the Austrian energy debate, it is very important to note the high contribution of renewable energy from power stations that have been there for a long time, that have been in place for several decades, built in our parents' and even grandparents' generation. Austria, like Switzerland, well, known for their mountains mostly, has a very beneficial topography, in particular for hydroelectric dams, for baseload power, and also for natural storage and pumped storage hydro that can cover most of the peak load electricity demands. So they are lucky. About 60% of electricity generation capacity in Austria is from hydroelectric dams, a total of 13.2 gigawatts in 150 large-scale and about 3,000 small-scale hydro plants. They've been there for quite some time. Blessed country. Then, in the 1970s, the socialist government came up with a strategy to build a total of 3 nuclear reactors in Austria, mostly for reasons of being modern. It was perceived to be modern to have nuclear reactors. Also to provide another source of large baseload power that was then believed to be necessary. Professor Barnum has just shown that it's not necessary, it's detrimental to the energy revolution. Built from 1972, the Zwentendorf nuclear plant is a single boiling water reactor. During the process of building the reactor, a fierce debate emerged with anti-nuclear opponents of the project, even blocking the building site, and the state-controlled utility flying in the nuclear fuel bundles with army helicopters above the heads of the protesters. That didn't go down well, not at all. The then socialist chancellor, Prime Minister Bruno Kreisky, was so sure of having a majority still in favor of the project that he announced a binding referendum, a Volksabstimmung, on the issue of commissioning the plant. It was sitting there, it had the nuclear fuel inside it. All they had to do is switch it on, basically. And on the 5th of November 1978, 50.47% of voters said no. It was never commissioned. So Austria ended up, has been mentioned before, with a constitutional law. I think it's the only country in the world with a constitutional law making it illegal to use nuclear power. The binding referendum put a stop to the commissioning of the plant literally in the last minute. The image, by the way, is obviously a fake. The clock stuck on 5 minutes to 12. It has been put there later. But the entire nuclear power plant is preserved like the rest of most of the reactor in the 1970 state. In the wake of the referendum, Parliament adopted a law, the Atomsperrgesetz, first of all, even in 1978. No nuclear power plant was to be built in Austria without a referendum. 2 years later, the pro-nuclear forces came back and used, in that case, non-binding citizens' initiative in 1980 in favor of building nuclear power plants and finally starting up Zwentendorf. They gathered more than 400,000 signatures for that, and the government declined. In that case, it was good that the government didn't listen to the people. Like that. Sometimes we like it. Then 6 years later, Chernobyl occurred, and we've heard this morning how heavily Austria was contaminated by the Chernobyl fallout. 13% of its land area contaminated by cesium above 40,000 becquerels per square meter. I have to keep on repeating that. It's quite really high levels. Second only to Belarus in land area contaminated to that level. And that led to a very strong majority opposing nuclear power, several citizens' initiatives against nuclear power, and finally, in 1998, a constitutional law making the use of any civilian or military nuclear power in even the transport of fissile material through Austria illegal. So we're now in the position of using the nuclear power plant in Zwentendorf, the safest nuclear reactor in the world, as a venue for open-air concerts, and Nikki has actually been there to one of the festivals. It was good. Bit expensive site for an open-air venue, but anyway. The other important thing to understand the Austrian debate is our roots. We are Friends of the Earth Austria. We are an environmentalist group. So in the 1950s to 1970s, there were quite a number of large-scale hydro dams being built, and in particular the projected dam in the Hainburg wetlands, very close to the capital city of Vienna, became the focus point for the emerging Austrian environmental movement in the early 1980s. You can see it on that picture with all the Hundertwasser-inspired posters and things there. The blockade of the Hainburg Au in the winter of 1984 was, after the protest against Zwentendorf, the largest demonstration and also the first act of mass civil disobedience in Austria. This was also the movement that Global 2000 Friends of the Earth Austria was born from. So its nature conservation was supporting an environmentally friendly use of renewable sources, such as small-scale hydro, biomass, solar power, and wind farms, which we've been advocating ever since, together with a strong opposition to nuclear power and other fossil fuels. That's recent history. After the next nuclear accident, it's Prime Minister Feynman again. He seems to be coming up quite a lot today. The situation in Austria 5 years ago was quite schizophrenic. I'm going to show that later again. Utilities imported a lot of electricity from neighboring countries. Lots of these countries have nuclear power plants. And this electricity was sold to customers without any disclosure where it came from. While at the same time, Austrian utilities were exporting a lot of electricity from renewable sources, in particular to Germany, and selling it for prime, basically. This lack of transparency to electricity consumers that mostly want to buy electricity from renewable sources, at least in Austria, most of them want to support the Energiewende, was an obvious problem we had been campaigning on for several years. And then Global 2000 and Greenpeace Central Eastern Europe started a campaign for full disclosure, for full transparency for electricity consumers. And to a certain extent, we got lucky. Fukushima exploded. Well, if you can say it's lucky. We got the momentum to change something. In the wake of the Fukushima nuclear accident, we started a petition with the mass media tabloid Kronenzeitung, 3 million readers in a country with 8 million inhabitants. We collected more than 650,000 signatures, and with this backing we managed to commit government and utilities to change the electricity law, make labeling of electricity mandatory. And that's me and the director of Greenpeace Central Eastern Europe with the Prime Minister. This campaign, and in particular the changes to the national electricity law, caused intense discussions even in international media. That's the Spiegel basically saying this law is probably illegal, it's probably going to be overturned, which it hasn't been. And we see it as a first step to changes in the EU Renewables and Electricity Internal Market Directive for full transparency for electricity customers. Fukushima also changed the situation for renewable electricity in Austria. There were some changes to the support scheme for new renewable sources. The Ökostromgesetz 2012 got the Austrian Energiewende going again since its stagnation due to some botched up attempts in the early 2000s. Still a lot of subsidy goes into biomass, which is predominantly renewable electricity, at least in Austria, from burning wood and biogas, of which the conservative farmers profit. So this is a highly politicized issue. But near the heavily populated eastern region in Austria, near Vienna, the capital city, there was a big expansion of wind farms in areas with very good conditions in Burgenland. And this was also done in a way that didn't affect nature conservation or rare bird habitat zones, which is very important for us as well. Right, it's him again. The Austrian Energiewende, there's still much to be done. So the focus of our 2015 climate campaign in the run-up to the very important COP climate conference was to get the Austrian government to commit to a clear goal of 100% renewable energy, not just electricity, by 2050, without the use of nuclear, obviously, it's forbidden, but also without coal-fired power plants or fracking, and also to give support to the victims of climate change in the form of financial support to areas hit most by climate change, predominantly in the global south. We showed the possibility of doing this with the study, even with the benefits on employment in Austria, and we commissioned a study with WWF and Greenpeace and us jointly that made it stronger. Climate change, global warming, has affected Austria over-proportionately, whereas globally the temperatures have already risen by 0.85 degrees centigrade. The Austrian IPCC report shows that Austria is hit by global warming much higher. Here the climate has already heated up by 2 degrees centigrade over the last more than 100 years. We can already see the effects of this very clearly: loss of glaciers, loss of winter tourism, and an annual loss through extreme weather situations in excess of 1 billion euros annually. So again, we were happy that Bundeskanzler Faymann, the Prime Minister, said almost what we told his member of cabinet he should say in Paris. Austria continues to maintain its ambitious target of increasing the share of renewable energy and electricity generation to 100% by the year 2030. This is easily achievable from the Austrian situation, but some important decisions have to be taken soon. We need an energy strategy to achieve this. So there will be many challenges to get there, not least that Prime Minister Faymann did not consult with his conservative coalition partners on this before Paris. He said it more or less off the cuff. And also that some utilities are not happy with this. We as civil society will now have to keep up the pressure. That's how we got the Austrian government to start the court case on Hinkley Point, they wouldn't have done that without pressure, obviously. I'm really confident that we can go to 100% renewable electricity by 2030, and then also that we can go to 100% renewable energy, so heating and everything, transportation, by 2050. We have to get more efficient in the way we use energy compared to now. We have to save half of the energy we use. We have to reduce our energy consumption by 50%, but that's doable. That's a study we presented last year. This can be done if we start it now. Thanks very much.